I would like to take this time to go over a little bit of that curtain exercise together to maybe understand how to think through the process and how to work through that spreadsheet to get a more accurate number. So we were tasked to do window draperies for the kitchen and for the bedroom. And I'm just going to focus on the bedroom windows. If we can do the bedroom windows, we can pretty much do any other similar type of drapery. So there's 3 windows here, and they're all the same size. This is kind of representation of the window. I think it's a 3 foot by 5 foot window, if I remember it properly, and there's 3 of them, so they're all kind of set up the same way. So one of the first things we're given is the actual fabric that's being used, and I picked one out from the internet, and I give information that you're needing to know how much material. That's what it boils down to. How much material do we need to create this curtain? And so I found a material online that's 54 inches as a standard size cotton, and I made up a fabric shipping amount similar to what you have in the book, and installation and all that. So that gives us all the pieces that we need for this. And so we need to kind of be aware of, where do these numbers go in the spreadsheet that's given to us? I mean, where do we find, what do we want to put it in there? How do we want to organize it? What do some of these things even mean? One of the resources that you have that maybe you've not been looking at as carefully is the book. So here is an example of one of the assignments in the book. And you can see the steps are also laid out pretty clearly. And if you go back to the assignment direction, you can find out where she's getting her numbers. And then just basically do the same thing with this worksheet. So side by side, going back and forth between the worksheets provided by me and then the worksheets in the book, or the worksheets laid out in the book, the step by step, it kind of shows you a little bit where things are going and how things are set up. So one of the first things we had to do was determine the location of the rod that's holding up this drapery. And based off some of the videos that we had in the past, they said halfway to 2/3 up for the rod. So it could have been 88 inches or 90.7. For this exercise, let's make it 90.7. So from the rod down, we're going to want 90.7 inches based off of this information we have. This will give us the length that the client desires, which was told as basically kiss the floor length. And so we know that's where it has to be. And it's going to be opening on this wall in this direction. So we're going to stack against the side here. So we placed our rod there. We've got the height we need. We also know that we want to go over just a ways so that when we open up the curtain, it kind of lines up here. It stacks on this side, and then the window can be more open. So then we have the height, and we need to know the width. And so looking at the worksheet that we have, we need to say trim to trim measure of window, and then a stack back allowance, and that'll give us a flat measure. Oh, wait a second. What's a flat measure? Well, going back to here, the flat measure is basically the width of the cloth laid flat. Now, we're not going to want it laid flat, but we start there, and then we start adding to it. So, I mean, ideally, when it's closed, we want it to have some sort of rippling, right? There's some sort of kind of curving and rippling and kind of looking nice. And then when it stacks up to the side, we want to kind of stack it all the way over in such a way that it's really tight. So how do we make that? How do we make this flat fabric that covers just a flat window become more full? Well, there's that fullness percentage that we're going to add on to it. So let's go back here to the worksheet here. And then, so the trim to trim measure of window, we said was 36 inches. So let's go ahead and put that in there. And then the stack back allowance was something that was given to us. Stack back allowance is 15%. So that's what's given to us. So that's what we will use. Type in 15%. And so the flat measure of treatment is going to be that 36 plus the 15%. That'll give us a little bit more yardage here. What does that mean for the piece? Well, it means that I'm going to take this fabric, and instead of being this wide, I'm going to start with a fabric that's this wide. That it goes all the way to that stack back area. So we're going to say that's what we want to start with. That's the fabric we want to start with to make sure that it's nice and full when we get our piece. So that means that we are going to multiply this by this plus 1. In other words, it's going to be 1.15. So that's going to equal whatever's in this cell times, now I have to do parentheses here, 1 plus 15% and parentheses. I could also have typed in 1.15 back in that stack back allowance and then just did a straight multiplication. But I think this really reflects more of the book. There's the 15% stat back, so 50% stat back means doing this kind of a formula. So we're starting off with 41.1 inches for the width. So now we need to know the fullness. And in this particular example, we want it to be 3 times fullness. I think the book mentions 2.5 to 3 times. So we're going to do 3 times fullness in this particular one. And we don't need any returns. So what are returns? Well, to avoid light leakage, and maybe fancy up the curtain a bit, we would return it back. The fullness will help us have this kind of look when it's open, right? And so we basically are saying that for this fabric, we want to go 3 times the length, so that when we're done, put it onto the rod, it'll fold nicely. It'll kind of give some waves, and again, it'll look nice and full when you put it off to the side. So the fullness, we're told, is 3. So then the total fullness is going to equal the flat measure of treatment times the fullness amount. And notice at every instant I'm using a cell. So I'm putting data in cells, but then formula-wise, I'm using the cell and that way we can change it. Perhaps the client wants only 2.5 fullness, or the next project is 4 fullness. So the total fullness is 124.2 inches. Then overlaps. They said for a one-way draw, 10 inches, 20 inches for a two-way draw. And so in this case, we're just going to put in 10 inches. It's just a one-way draw. And it says this allows for 3 or 4 inch returns. Again, we're not having any returns, but if we did returns, this would take care of that. And then even has a little note there, if returns are deeper, add more. So in other words, we start with 10 minimum, but if we have a deep, if it pulls out further than 3 or 4 inches, and that'll happen if you've got maybe several layers of curtains going on, then we have to add that here. So 10 inches are it. Looking at this, it'd be good to add up the total fullness and the extra overlap and the extra returns that we need here. I think we need to have another line. And so I'm going to go to line number 14. I'm going to insert a row. You're always welcome to modify spreadsheets, even if I provide them for you or that the book provides. I think I'd like to have a complete number of inches to start with. I'll call this section total fullness plus overlap. And that would be inches, yes. And so what would that be? I'm just going to use the AutoSum function. It's going to be all those things. Now I know that this is blank here, but if I ever put in a data in the future that, I need another few inches for this, it'll be ready to go. So I have my total fullness and overlap. My overall width of this thing, 134.2 inches. So now looking at the width of fabric, well, we're told that our fabric is 54 inches. Other inches could possibly be there. There's different size fabric widths. And they're typically on a bolt, similar to this. There's selvage on each side, a bolt, and they just roll it out. And so the fabric is 54 inches wide. And we have number windows. We have 3 windows we're working with. Now, we could put this 3 in the summary sheet and take care of it there, but we could also do it here. The book says either way is acceptable, so I have it in here and I think it's good to go. So now I've got my total fullness, my width of fabric, and my number of windows. I should be able to get this thing figured out to how many full widths do I need. It's a roundup, so it's equals roundup, begin parentheses. It's the total fullness divided by the width of fabric. If we only had one window, we'd be okay, but let's do this, times the number of windows. That'll give us a number, but we don't want any decimals, and we want it rounded up. So I'm going to comma 0, 0 decimals, and parentheses. If you break out this function, this roundup function, into bits and pieces, it's not overly crazy, but you just have to remember what it's going to want. So equals roundup, B14 divided by B15, right? Times the number of windows. Again, if this is 1, it wouldn't be a big issue. But honestly, if we're going to use this spreadsheet again in the future, we might as well just leave it there, and in the future, just put in 1 in the number of windows, and it'll work out just fine. And comma 0 means no decimals. 8. We have 8 full widths of this window for this fabric. From this roll of fabric, we'll need to cut 8 of them to get the width sufficiently to have that fullness that we're looking for 3 windows. For 1 window, we just need 3 full widths. Well, let's go here and find out about this finished length of drapery. We said it was going to be 90.7. And we did that because of the location of the rod and length to the floor. They want to add 18 inches for hems and heading. If we cut fabric exactly this size and then put a hem on the bottom and a hem on the top, I mean, you'll see right now this is not kiss the floor type situation. So what we need to do then is, instead of making it shorter, using that overall, we need to actually add to this length. So this now has to add another 18 inches, and that would give me enough to hem the top, hem the bottom, and bring it in a couple times. All the stuff that we're told to do in the reading assignment and how it works. This will give us the correct length when it's all sewn up. And that's why it's called a cut length. Put 18 inch there for the hems and the heading, top and bottom. And so the total cut length, and that 18 inches, we might need to use more or less depending on if it's a wider or narrower hem. So the total cut length is going to equal the finished length plus that extra 18 inches. So here is our finished length. At this point, it says if there is a repeat, you have to continue along. If not, then you can go ahead and skip to step 4. Well, we were told about this from our information that there is a repeat. It's an 18-inch repeat. And so we will have to continue on with this Excel spreadsheet going down. What does it matter about the repeat? Well, what matters is that when they cut it from the fabric and they start lining things up, they start lining up the pieces, the pattern's got to line up. You know, they'll sew these things together, and you don't want when they sew things together for the fabric to look like, the pattern to look like this, right? I mean, you know, like that when they sew it together. you'd see that there'd be something off about the fabric at that point. So when they put the curtain up, they're going to have to try and line this up so that when they sew it together, they kind of line up the fabric like this, you know, cut it off, make it work, and then all of a sudden you're going to have the look that looks right on these other pieces. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, if they just come along and, you know, if we don't worry about this offset, you might get things like this happening where you've got half a flower being cut off, and it's just not correctly done. That's just not how you do it. So what is the length of repeat? It's 18 inches per the information we've been given. And so then it says divide the cut length by length of repeat to get number of repeats, rounded up to whole number. All right. So how many repeats are they worrying about? Well, okay, cut length. The cut length is 108, so equals the cut length divided by the number of repeats. Well, divided by 18 to get the number of repeats we're going to need, rounded up. Rounded up. So I need to go back in here and type in round up again, begin parentheses, again, comma 0, end parentheses, press enter. So we're going to have 7 full repeats. So then our cut length can't be 108 because there are repeats here that we have to match up. So our cut length is, it's the full repeats times the length of each repeat. So that's equals this times this. Enter. That is a new adjusted cut length, and it's because of the repeat. In other words, we cannot cut fabric at 108. Even though that's sufficient amount of fabric, we can't cut it at 108 because the repeat is forcing us to make it a little longer so we match this pattern. So the total length of fabric required is the adjusted cut length times the full widths. We still need to multiply 8 widths of fabric, but instead of being 108 each, they're going to be 126 each. So total length of fabric, that's going to equal the adjusted cut length times 8 full widths. It's 1,008 inches. And then equals the inches divided by 36, and that'll get us yards, right? Every yard's 3 feet, 36 inches. And that's why we're dividing it, because we purchase fabric in yards. So looking back at our model, we're going to get 54-inch wide. The yards is how much of this length, how many yards of this length do we need? That's what the yardage is telling us about. So it's not a square foot amount. You're getting 54 inches. We've read that. We saw that in the information. That's what they said the fabric was, and that's what we're getting. So it's how much length of fabric are we cutting? We have to have total 28 yards of fabric. This is rounded up to nearest half. So what we're using that is not the roundup function, because we need to go to the nearest half yard. We'll need to use a different function, and I think the lecture talked about that, and if not, we'll talk about it here. Equals ceiling. Ceiling of what? Ceiling of this cell, comma, 0.5, enter. By what unit? Ceiling by what unit? And it ended up being 28 because 28 is the same. What does that mean? What's the difference? All right, so let's try this. Let's do 28.25. Let's say that was the number. And if we do equals roundup, this number, comma 0, you'll see it says 29. Well, that makes sense, right? You have to round up, but you're rounding up the whole number. If I instead of this, I said round up, comma 1 for 1 decimal, I'd get 28.3. Well, that's not a half yard. That's a 0.3 of a yard. All right. So that's the problem. If you know, that's not going to help it. If 0.5 won't help it either. See, because 0.5 doesn't mean anything to round up. Round up is how many decimal places beyond. Ceiling, however, and it's this cell here, comma, 0.5, it'll round it up. So round up is how many decimal places, and we've been using 0 because we want whole numbers typically. But in this case, you buy by half yard. So if you can buy by half yard, I want to be able to do that. So even if this goes to 0.5, or let's say 0.6, now we go up and they both match because it's above that 0.5 threshold. Hopefully that makes sense about the two different functions. This window has lining, and so we need to get that into account. All we need is the cut length. Most of the time, lining is just something to just align the fabric. They're not going to spend expensive fabric for that. If you've actually got lining that has some sort of repeat, you're going to need to take that into account as well. But we're going to say this is fine. So the cut length from step 3, instead of me typing it in and perhaps typing it in incorrectly, I'm going to go back to the step 3 cut length equals. So what's step 3 cut length? This one. But what about that adjusted cut length? Well, we really don't need that because there is no repeat to this fabric. We just need the overall length for the amount of fabric we need. So B23 is all we need to have there. Just press enter. And so the next thing is it says multiply the cut length, CL, by number of widths from step 2. And they have widths here. That's kind of just a little bit confusing. And so I think I'm just going to change this up a little bit. This really has to happen down here at the total. In other words, if I multiply here, I'm going to get inches, not widths. So that doesn't make any sense. So I'm just going to go ahead and just kind of copy this. And in the words down here, I'm going to put parentheses here. And just kind of basically state what my formula is going to use. That way I can double check myself. If I get a funny answer here, I'll say, that doesn't sound right. So this one here is going to be just number of widths from step 2. All right, so that's going to be, again, equals. And if I go up here to step 2, the number of widths is 8 full widths. So now I'll have that there. And then this one, total, multiply cut length by number of widths equals cut length times number of widths. Press enter. So we have 869 inches of fabric that we need to cut off the bolt to get enough for 3 windows. We could actually put this whole formula right in here, but I think spreading out is helpful. Plus, we double check ourselves. Do we get the right widths? Divide by 36 to convert inches to yard equals this divided by 36. And then this total yards rounded up is the ceiling function again, equals ceiling, parentheses, this up above, comma 0.5, enter. Now, something else we could do instead of typing it in, because we're looking at the cell above, and it's the same formula here. I could have selected this, right-click, copy, and went down here, right-click, paste, and we would have gotten the same answer. You know, it's the same formula. If ever you do copy, make sure that the copied formula refers to the correct cells. Just double check. So we need to buy 24.5 yards of the lining, 28 yards of the fabric. We now need to take this data and put it in the summary sheet to compile it all together. These dark cells we want to link back to the individual worksheets. So from the information we have, we know the name of the product, we know the fabric, who it's from, and the sizes and all this. We have the shipping and all that. So we're gonna put all this information in the kind of the right spots. So this is not the kitchen window. It's down here, the bedroom window. Let's get down to the bedroom windows section. So the fabric is, I think, SMC Designs. All right. The pattern is Spice Twillingate. Now, Parkside. There's just one color from what I could tell. So I'm just going to put, not applicable. And the width, it's 54 inches. The repeat is 18. So the quantity of yards, I'm going to go back to the bedroom. And this is going to be the yards that are going to be ordered, which is going to be 28. Right-click copy, or hit the copy button. Then go over to the summary. Then right-click, paste special, and paste link. So whatever I have in this cell is going to be showing up here. Cost per yard, $22.49. So the subtotal is going to be the cost per yard times the number of yards equals yards times cost per. For the shipping, we just kind of have a total amount. So we're just going to put 12 there. So that's the shipping. If the company had by per fabric or per item, per window, then we do that to the per part here. But in this case, it just seems like $12 straight. The lining, let's go back to the lining then, kind of do the same repeat here. And so for the lining, we have to do the same thing as before. We go back to the bedroom sheet, and the lining here is this 24.5. So right click copy, go to the summary page, right click, paste special, paste link. And again, this one here is going to be $8 a yard. Again, that's a number given to us. And so just copy that and paste it. Fine. Again, linking to this back to the sheet, I can change the numbers on the sheet and this will automatically update. The hardware, we're told the hardware is $315. And so then for the estimated shipping, it's going to be included with this other one, so that's 0. And this one, the shipping for the hardware, again, looking at the, it says shipping hardware is $36, and that's exactly what it is. So it's 36. And so then we just add up these pieces here. Equals this plus this. That makes sense there, right? And the reason to do that separately is in case in the future there is a different price for lining. So we can still use this spreadsheet here. And this one is going to be equals this plus this. One thing I could have done is I could copy this down. All right. So labor per width. Well, let's go back here a second. Looking at our labor information, it's $60 per width, and installation is $100 per window. Okay, so the cost is $60 per width and $100 per window. So the quantity here is that there are only 3 windows, but what is the width? Now this is going to be one of those numbers we need to link. So let's go back to the bedroom, and the width is right here. Copy, right click copy, paste special, paste link. So then this is again the multiplication equals this times this equals this times this. Okay, the formatting of this cell looks kind of off. For some reason it looks extra large. It really should be like this. So I'm just going to go ahead and just change that formatting back to 12 point. There you go. That's about right for what it's supposed to be. I'm not sure why it got so big. The total for this window is going to be the sum function. And I'm just going to click here and drag it all the way up. Right now, press enter. Right now there's nothing up here. But as items are added on, because the kitchen window is part of the assignment, as that's added on, these will change, these will update to be what they need to be, and it would complete this project. One last thing to do is just to look over your spreadsheet and see if everything's looking okay. Maybe look at some of the formatting. That would be better for center formatted, so it just reads better. Same thing here. I think this would be better center formatted. It seemed like these were already centered All right, so sometimes depending on how your spreadsheet's laid out, you might need to come back and adjust a couple of things. It's a minor step, but it helps the spreadsheet read better.